not even the high emission scenarios, and the disappearance of average annual snowpack in the Sierra Nevadas. It could be a 60% loss under the low emission scenario. It could be a 20 or 80% loss under the medium emission scenario. 90 to 100% under the high if we don't act quickly. We don't know yet. Next slide, please. Flooding risk. Sacramento is already the second most flood-prone region in the United States, second only to New Orleans, and we all saw what happened in the most flood risk region in the country. So add that on top of that, climate change. And what does that mean? Well, it means more unpredictable flow. You know how I showed you that last slide about snowpack disappearing? We'll continue to get water in those mountains, but they just won't stay there. The water will come down, and at very unpredictable times and unpredictable volumes. So we'll have inflows. This slide actually shows you the combination of sea level rise with high tide and a 100-year level storm. And what does that mean? Remember New York City a couple falls ago when they had Hurricane Sandy? The story in New York City was storm surge. This shows you inundation in the Delta and even coming up in the Sacramento region, Elk Grove. Some of those storm surges, this is a 2030 storm surge impact model that was done by Surging Seas, the Surging Seas project with Climate Central. So there's impacts in our region. The population affected in this slide just in the Sacramento region is 30 to 40,000 people under that scenario, and that's less than 20 years away. So we've got some challenges to do, to work on there. Next slide, please. So that's the bad news. What's happening at the policy level? We've got statewide policy already in place. Most of us in the room have probably heard of the Global Warming Solutions Act of 2006, also commonly shortened as AB 32. We've also heard about SB 375, at least the planning nerds in the room or the people that think about land use and transportation have heard of SB 375. But that's the Sustainable Communities and the Climate Protection Act of 2008. We also have California doing work on climate adaptation. Cities and counties are taking action. There's action plans in place. I happen to have worked on a climate action plan for the city of Sacramento, which is a pretty central part of our region, of course. Sacramento, as you can see on this map, the projected emission, or this graph, the projected emissions are supposed to go from 4 million metric tons up to over 6 million if we don't take any action, and that's compared to a 2005 baseline. Cities and counties in this region have also done similar planning. We all sort of have an average per capita emission rate of about 10 metric tons. We need to get those emissions down to at least 8.5 metric tons or less, preferably more quickly by the year 2020 to kind of stay in line with what the state's doing. Next slide, please. So what does climate action mean? What does it look like? You know, obviously the emission reduction has been the focus of state law and state policy. It's been a big push, but something that people forgot is that climate change is already having an impact in the region. We need to start looking at ways to kind of co-equally look at emission reductions. We need to cut down our carbon footprint, but we also need to find ways to make sure that we're mitigating the impacts of climate change in the future. And there's some integrated ways of doing that, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So next slide, please. This is a graph, a pie chart that shows you where our emissions basically come from in this region. So what does what does our community carbon footprint actually look like? Transportation has been said already, at least half or more of emissions in our community. It's going to, all these wedges are a little bit bigger or smaller depending on where you live in the region. If you live downtown, your transportation footprint's probably a lot less than that. But our buildings, if you look at that blue and red wedge, residential and commercial energy use, mostly in buildings, isn't too far behind that. So the built environment, the things we live in, the things we work in, there's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse in our buildings too, and we can't forget about that, and we'll talk about some strategies to look at that. Solid waste, the stuff we throw away, it's not carbon. Waste causes methane. CH4, the stuff that's in the landfill, it's about 6 to 7% of our problem. And of course, water and wastewater, there's some energy used to pump that too. Next, please. Next slide here. This shows you what the transportation carbon footprint looks like in our region, depending on where you live in the region. And this is one of the principal reasons why SB 375 was passed in California. It's because we don't have a very efficient footprint in terms of land use and the transportation system that support our land use. So we need to avoid the red. We need to avoid the orange. We need to get those orange numbers down and the red numbers down. And a lot of that's done through planning more compact, transit-supportive, walkable, livable communities that are planned well and aren't fully dependent on single-occupant vehicle commuting 50 miles plus a day. The average commute in Sacramento is way too big. It's over 25 miles. So we need to get that down. Next slide, please. So let's talk about some categorical ways of action that are happening already, some goals that have been set in the region, and some ways that we can just take action. Land use and transportation, just talked about that. SACOG, our Regional Transportation and Planning Agency, has set a goal, because of SB 375, to cut vehicle miles traveled. You'll hear the word VMT if you sit in the policy room a lot. But we need to get that VMT down. We need to get vehicle miles traveled down at least 7% per capita by the year 2020, and a lot more than that by the year 2035. And there's land use ways to do that, increasing density, increasing the diversity of our land uses so we don't have to drive everywhere, so we can actually walk to the store, get our kids safely to school. And a lot of that's done through walking and biking. Transit use, we need to expand infrastructure, we need to change habits. We need to look at ways to get low-emission vehicles on the road and low-carbon fuels in our cars. And I just got the stop sign, so I'm not even started. Wrap up. Okay. I'm actually going to, let's go to energy efficiency, and we'll have to skip the other topics. But so, is someone from SMUD here today? Did I see someone? There she is. So Genevieve Jerome here, one of the directors on the board, is here today. But we have some really, really great work being done by our electric utility. And PG&E is doing great work. It's in the state as well. But, the biggest story with energy isn't solar. Solar is important. It's important at this utility scale, and it's important that we have more of it. But the really important thing, and probably the most cost-effective thing we can do to reduce emissions today, is to get less energy use in the buildings we have. 70% of the buildings we have today are still going to be around in 2030 or 2050. So we have to figure out how to get that energy use down. Every building we build today is being built into fairly green standards. California has some of the most advanced energy standards in the state, but it's about getting people, property owners, realtors, investors, financing, to really help people retrofit homes when they buy them, when they are doing a remodel. It's about getting the opportunities to reduce energy at home. Some of it's about killing the plug load. The plug load is that thing that's plugged in all night that you don't realize is sucking energy off the grid. So it's about getting those things under control too. So there's from really costly things to really low-cost things that we can do, and that's some of the biggest opportunity for immediate household or business level action. Waste is a big issue. Next slide. There's some folks in the room that are doing some great work, that are kind of doing forward thinking about getting the food waste out of our waste stream, getting people to compost more. We've got a big farm to fork to fuel movement here in Sacramento, and that's already happening, and we just need to see more of that happen. We need to get from pilot level program to everybody's doing it by the year 2020, or at least 2040 at the latest. Water. We talked about water. We need to keep saving water. There's a state law in California that's requiring all cities and counties and water districts to cut their urban per capita water use 20% by 2020. There's a lot of ways we can do that. Some of it the government's going to help with metering and pricing, but there's other things like everybody learning how to follow the rules, making sure those rules are clear and understood. It's about looking at landscaping. 2/3 of your water use in Sacramento, if you're a single-family homeowner, 2/3 of your use, hundreds and hundreds of gallons a day, are going onto your grass in your yard. So we need to get that average down. And there's ways of doing that. There's new Cash for Grass programs coming out that you can take advantage of. Things that not a lot of people are doing are rainwater harvesting, gray water use, and then kind of utility scale recycled water is kind of the next generation of action that we're going to be seeing. It's already happening in the state. So I'm just going to stop there. I had some great stuff to talk about in terms of adaptation, but if you flip to my last slide, Dale, I think that's what's the really important message, and Mark said it very well. You all showed up today, and if you're looking, if this is all still super high level, you're not connecting, things you can do are drive less, support government policies that encourage you to drive less. You may not be able to buy an electric car, a Prius, but just finding ways to make those small commitments to maybe bike to work once a week. Get your kids out on the bike once a week instead of driving them to school. Be energy-wise, be water-wise, use less, and find ways to do that. And there's so much out there in terms of rebates, financing, low-cost things you can do. Reducing, recycling. If you haven't done it already, think about the next step. Think about composting. Think about making conscious decisions about the products you buy and how much waste is associated with that. We'll never get to zero waste if we don't really figure out ways to mitigate every source of waste and get it out of the waste stream. And how do we do it? By making it fun, by being creative. And there's so many great ideas. I can't wait to see this video because I think we're going to see some really great stuff in terms of creativity and action. We need to celebrate success. We need to form community. A lot of people, I think, want to change, but they're not willing how to do it, and they're going it alone. So don't go it alone. Don't go bowling alone. Find a friend. Be accountable. And very last, this is about upping the game. Mark said it so well in terms of keeping the pressure on our elected officials at all levels, especially state and federal. Speak out, be active, be the change, and start upping the game. Thank you.
And if you, this is anybody who wants to speak, you've got 2 minutes to speak. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Your comments, your concerns, ideas, solutions. How are we going to know your amazing idea if you don't tell us? How are we going to know your concern that maybe someone has a solution to if you don't come up and speak? So we will keep you to 2 minutes. And if time allows, there might be time for Eric and Mark to respond to some of the comments. But we're being spontaneous and switching things around because that's how it's going. And we have our first speaker here.
Yes,
and our
Stephen
timekeeper is right here.
I'm with the 350 group that has put this on. I would like everyone to be aware that this is on Access Television, which can be seen on Comcast, AT&T. You can download it, stream it, download it. And it'll be repeated on Access TV, so you can look at their website to find out when that'll be. So we thank them for putting this on film for posterity. I would like to thank everyone who's been involved in this event today, all the 30 sponsors, especially 2 young ladies that I've had the privilege of knowing for the last 4 years or so since 350 Sacramento has started. And that is Martha Turner and Lori Littman, who we wouldn't be here today if it weren't for their persistence, their fortitude, and their drive for this. So thank you very much. I really don't want to take any more time, but I do wear another hat, and I'm the fellow making solar brownies. If anyone wants to try them at lunchtime on July 19th, and there's some flyers out there. On July 19th in Land Park, we'll be having a very large solar cooking demonstration for anyone who has an interest in that. It's free. It'll be in the park right by City College in that little section where they do all the walks and runs. So please pick up a little reminder sheet, and we're going to actually be making a film festival type movie of that event. So it'll be our effort to, it's one of the BBs. It's like riding a bike or whatever. Solar cooking's just kind of an interesting little sideline for those who want to do their share in reducing their consumption, like Mark says, which is the real answer. Anyway, thank you. So whoever wants to make a comment. Next.
Hello, I'm Sally Shapiro. I'm a sculptor, but I've always appreciated nature, and I was immersed in nature for a year when I hitchhiked to Rio de Janeiro from California. I have a vision of a no-container store to try to eliminate the solid waste, and it would hopefully it could be an adjunct of a small restaurant, local neighborhood restaurant, where, because they have all the permits for cooking, and everything would be sold in bulk, and you have to bring your own container, like juices, and this would also employ people eventually, to make the juice fresh and mayonnaise, everything you need could be, it's just like an option, would be an option. You don't have to go to Safeway and come back with a million little jars and cans and everything. You can go to this little restaurant and they will refill it in a bulk container, and you have to bring your own. There won't be any containers there sold. I have 30 seconds. But, so I was just thinking that this would be a good idea. Thank you.
Hi there. I'm Sue Teranishi. I am active with the Sacramento Area Bicycle Advocates and Breathe California of Sacramento, also with the Clean Air Agenda. I wanted to put a challenge out there. Some statistics that I heard a while back, you heard Eric talk about driving less and walk and bike more. And the challenge I'd like to put out there is for your trips that are 2 miles or less. I've heard the statistic that over half of the trips we make are 2 miles or less, and 90% of those we drive to. That really is a terrible statement, I think, as far as health, pollution, money we're wasting. So think about the trips that you make that are 2 miles or less, and change at least half of them to walk or bike. Use transit. Don't drive alone to these 1 mile or 2 mile trips. We're driving way too much, and if each of us could just change those 1 or 2 mile trips and not drive, that would be a tremendous help in reducing emissions. If you don't bicycle or walk because you think it's dangerous in your neighborhood, please become an advocate. Talk to your elected official. Join SABA. Help us at Breathe California. There are many organizations trying to make it safer to walk and bike. And we know that in many neighborhoods in the community, it is dangerous to walk and bike. And help us who are trying to advocate for more and safer trips by human-powered activity to encourage more and more people to do that. So walk and bike more. Those trips that are 2 miles or less, think about really doing those ourselves.
Good morning. My name is Bill McGavern. I work on air quality and global warming at the state level for a group called the Coalition for Clean Air. And I want to tell you about an opportunity, because there's actually going to be a lot of money coming from the state to the local level to fight climate change. And when does that ever happen? The state's been taking money from local governments for years, but now there's actually money that's being generated by actually requiring the biggest polluters in the state to pay for their emissions. And that money is going to be reinvested to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that'll start actually July 1st with the next budget that the legislature and the governor are working on right now. We're looking at close to $1 billion just in the next fiscal year to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And a lot of that will come to local bodies like the Sacramento Air District, like